Once upon a time, Alco was one of the most powerful locomotive manufacturers in America. Then it vanished almost overnight. This was a company that produced 50,000 steam locomotives, powering the railroads that built a nation. But by 1969, its factories went silent, its workforce was gone, and its name was erased from an industry it helped create. Alco didn't just lose America's locomotive war, it was undone by decisions made long before the final blow ever arrived. In 1901, a new force in American industry took shape, not from a single inventor or a lone workshop, but from the joining of 7 locomotive builders. The American Locomotive Company, Alco, was born in a moment of ambition and calculation. Its founders, a board of seasoned industrialists and engineers, saw opportunity in unity. They pooled the legacy of the Schenectady Locomotive Works, the Brooks Locomotive Works of Dunkirk, the Cook Works of Patterson, and 4 others, each bringing their own patents, skilled workers, and regional contracts. The merger was not just a business deal. It was a declaration that the future of railroading would be built on scale. Schenectady, New York, became the heart of this new enterprise. The city's riverside factories offered easy access to steel, coal, and the sprawling rail network that stitched the country together. Here, the company could centralize production, coordinate design, and push out more locomotives than any one builder alone could manage. By the end of its first decade, Alco's assembly lines were rolling out engines for the New York Central, the Pennsylvania Railroad, and a growing roster of Western lines hungry for power. The scale of the operation was staggering for its time. Alco's foundries poured thousands of tons of iron and steel each year. Its blueprints filled vaults, and its payroll supported entire neighborhoods. The company's charter, filed in Syracuse, spelled out a mission to supply the machines that would pull America into the 20th century. Every resource, every tool, every skilled hand was now dedicated to one goal: building the backbone of a nation on rails. In these early years, Alco's destiny seemed limitless, its resources locked into the steam technology that would define an era. By the 1920s, the Schenectady shops thundered day and night, their forges glowing hot enough to light the city skyline. In these years, Alco became more than a company. It was an engine of American ambition. The numbers alone staggered the imagination. In 1910, workers assembled the company's 50,000th locomotive, a Pacific-type engine destined for the Erie Railroad. Newspapers sent reporters to cover the event. Children in Sunday best lined the fences as the finished machine rolled out, gleaming and immense, a monument to human skill and industrial muscle. Inside the factory gates, generations of skilled hands shaped steel and iron into the engines that hauled freight, soldiers, and families from coast to coast. The workforce swelled into the thousands, with entire neighborhoods built on Alco paychecks. Each whistle blast at the end of the shift echoed across Schenectady, a signal that another day's quota had been met, another mile of track powered by Alco's output. In a single peak year, more than 3,000 locomotives rolled off the lines. It was an achievement unmatched by any rival. Photographers captured the moment as executives posed beside the 50,000th engine, flanked by rows of workers in coveralls and caps. The press called it a victory for American industry, proof that the nation's future ran on rails. For a time, it seemed nothing could threaten Alco's place at the heart of the railroad age. But as the banners hung and the cameras flashed, the company's destiny was already tied to the steam technology that had built its empire, a strength that, in time, would become its greatest vulnerability. In the quiet corridors of Alco's Schenectady plant, the world outside was changing faster than anyone inside wanted to admit. The engineers who had mastered steam, men who could read the hiss of a boiler or the ring of a hammer, watched the first diesel prototypes with reserved curiosity, even skepticism. Diesel power, with its humming engines and electric traction, felt like an unproven gamble compared to the thunder and ritual of steam. Alco's board meetings in the early 1940s circled the topic but rarely pressed it. The company's first road switcher, the RS-1, rolled onto the rails in 1941, a technical marvel and a world's first, but it was treated as an experiment, not a revolution. Production records show only modest runs through the decade, with most resources still pouring into steam. Internal memos from the period reflect an engineering culture proud of its legacy, hesitant to abandon what had made it great. While a handful of forward-looking designers sketched diesel blueprints and lobbied for investment, the company's leadership hedged its bets. Alco's cautious stance left a window open, a window that a new kind of competitor, armed with boldness and a different vision, would soon force wide open. The delay, measured in years and missed opportunities, would prove costly. In a world racing toward diesel, hesitation became a weakness no amount of tradition could defend. General Motors' Electro-Motive Division didn't just build locomotives, it built an empire on service, speed, and certainty. While Alco's engineers debated the future, EMD was already reshaping the battlefield. 43 service hubs dotted the country by the early 1950s, each one stocked with parts and staffed by teams trained to get a broken engine rolling again within hours. For the railroads, this wasn't just convenience, it was a promise. A locomotive out of service meant freight delayed, contracts lost, and money burning away by the minute. EMD's mobile crews and the Parts on Call program turned downtime from a crisis into a footnote, something Alco's 5 regional depots couldn't match. Price became another weapon. EMD's catalogs, printed in glossy color, listed a 1,500 horsepower GP9 at $220,000, less than Alco's RS3 and with better warranty terms. Every sale came bundled with a 2-year guarantee and a performance clause. If the locomotive failed to deliver its rated horsepower, EMD would replace it. Alco's offers, handwritten and hedged with conditions, struggled to inspire the same confidence. Railroads noticed. Procurement officers in boardrooms from Chicago to Philadelphia began to trust EMD's numbers, and their order books followed. The old loyalties that once bound Alco to the heart of American railroading began to fray. Replaced by the certainty of EMD's service network and the cold logic of total cost, the rules of the game had changed, and Alco, for the first time, was playing catch-up. Pressure inside Alco's engineering offices reached a fever pitch as the diesel revolution swept the railroads. The company's design leaders, many of them veterans of steam, now faced a market that demanded something new, fast. Within months, they were told to deliver a mainline diesel engine that could match General Motors' output in both power and price. Schedules shrank. Testing windows closed. Shortcuts, once unthinkable, became the only way forward. Inside the file drawers, a memorandum dated October 12, 1949, bears the signature of Perry T. Egbert, Alco's chief design engineer. The subject was cooling system geometry on the new 244 diesel. Egbert's words are measured but clear. He warns that the water jackets encircling the main bearings are too narrow. The fix would require new tooling, an expensive, months-long process. Instead, the change is deferred. The memo notes, almost as an afterthought, that the risk of overheating will rise if engines are pushed hard in service. The decision is made. The first production diesels ship with the original cooling layout. Tooling costs still on the books. The design team, bound by deadlines and budgets, watches their reservations get filed away. The rush to catch up has left a hairline crack in the foundation. What began as a technical compromise, buried in paperwork and pressure, will soon move from the drafting tables to the rails, where every flaw finds its test. The first Alco diesels rolled out with hope and ceremony, but the reality waiting on the rails was far less forgiving. In the service yards of the Chicago and Northwestern, maintenance crews kept a running tally. How many miles could a new engine travel before it failed? For Alco's Model 244, the answer was a sobering 1,200 miles. Across the yard, GM's EMD units ran nearly 4 times as far, 4,800 miles, before a major breakdown. The numbers were not just statistics, they were lifelines for any railroad trying to keep freight moving and costs under control. Field service logs from the period read like a litany of troubles: overheating, cracked crankcases, turbochargers that gave out before their time. One entry dated June 1953 notes a head gasket rupture after just 3 days in service. Another describes a metal pop in the crankcase, oil pooling beneath a stalled locomotive. As the dispatcher reroutes a train, each failure meant hours of lost time, emergency repairs, and the risk of missed delivery contracts. Procurement officers, once loyal to the Alco name, began to whisper doubts in boardrooms. Reliability was not just a technical metric, it was the difference between profit and loss, reputation and regret. As word spread, the confidence that once filled Alco's order books began to drain away. Buyers who had built their fleets on steam power now weighed every new diesel purchase with a wary eye, knowing that a single failure could tip the scales toward a rival. Inside the boardroom at Schenectady, a cold reality began to settle over the table. The company's order backlog, once a fortress against hard times, had started to bleed away. In 1959, board minutes recorded a locomotive backlog of $12 million, still enough to keep the factories humming and the payrolls full. But as months slipped by, the numbers shrank. By 1962, the backlog had fallen to just $3 million. Each lost contract meant fewer engines on the line and fewer paychecks in the city. Directors pored over ledgers and sales projections, searching for relief in columns of figures. The old relationships with the big railroads, New York Central, Pennsylvania, and Southern, no longer guaranteed new orders. Procurement officers, once eager to sign for another dozen Alco units, now hesitated. The shadow of past reliability problems lingered, and every canceled order left a mark on the books. Pressure mounted with every board meeting. The numbers weren't just statistics, they were the lifeblood of an industrial giant. A shrinking backlog meant idle machines, layoffs, and the slow unraveling of a supply chain that had taken decades to build. With the cash cushion thinning, Alco's leaders faced a stark choice: gamble on a new product, or watch the order book vanish for good. The urgency in the boardroom was unmistakable. The fate of the company now hinged on one last bet. The Century Series arrived in a cloud of hope and anxiety, a last-ditch effort to reclaim lost ground. In the design offices at Schenectady, engineers and marketers worked side by side, drafting glossy brochures that promised a new era of power and reliability. The centerpiece was the Century 630, a 3,000 horsepower road switcher built to go head-to-head with General Motors' GP38. Alco's sales team pitched the 630 as a revolution, touting its advanced traction system and bold new styling. But behind the fanfare, the numbers told a different story. Order books from 1966 show only a handful of contracts. Southern Pacific took a few units. Chicago and Northwestern and the Lehigh Valley each placed modest orders, none reaching double digits. Across the industry, procurement officers hesitated. The shadow of past failures still hung over the Alco name. Railroads that once bought by the dozen now asked for 1 or 2, sometimes only as test units. The Century 630, born as a symbol of renewal, struggled to find a place in the fleets it was meant to save. Inside the plant, The mood shifted from anticipation to dread. Production lines idled between small runs. Sales brochures stacked up in storerooms, their promises growing stale as the months dragged on. In all, fewer than 90 Century 630s ever left the factory gates, a fraction of what Alco needed to survive. The gamble had been made, the dice rolled. As the last engines shipped out, the sense of finality settled over Schenectady. The company's future now depended on a product the market had already passed by. Inside the Schenectady plant, the hum of progress faded into the grind of uncertainty as the 1960s wore on. The old order had depended on a web of trusted suppliers, steel foundries, casting shops, and electric component makers, each bound to Alco by decades of handshake deals and purchase orders. That network, once a source of strength, began to fray under the weight of shrinking orders and relentless cost-cutting. Letters from suppliers started to arrive, polite but firm. Delivery times would lengthen. Quality guarantees were now best effort. The company's purchasing managers, caught between the demands of the production line and the realities of a thinning order book, watched as once reliable partners drifted away. Some foundries closed their doors. Others shifted their focus to automotive or defense contracts, where the volumes were higher and the risks smaller. The supply chain that had powered Alco's golden age was no longer a sure thing. In the midst of this erosion, a new kind of problem surfaced. Midway through the decade, casting porosity, a defect invisible to the naked eye but fatal to a diesel engine, began to creep into the heart of Alco's machinery. Supplier quality reports from 1965 and 1966 documented delays as entire batches of engine blocks were flagged for inspection or outright rejection. The porosity crisis was not just a technical setback. It was a warning that the company's foundation was crumbling from the inside out. Production lines slowed, then stalled as managers scrambled for replacements or workarounds. The chain reaction was swift, and with each delay, more suppliers saw the writing on the wall and pulled back. The once mighty engine of American industry found itself starved of the very materials and expertise that had built its reputation. By the time the casting crisis was brought under control, the damage was done. Alco's capacity to build at scale had vanished, and with it any real hope of recovery. In the spring of 1969, the silence inside the Schenectady plant felt unnatural. For nearly 70 years, the American Locomotive Company had been a heartbeat in the city, a place where the clang of steel and the thunder of engines meant steady work and pride. But now the machinery stood idle. The last locomotive rolled off the line in June, a final product of hands that had built the backbone of America's railroads. On September 23, 1969, Alco's headquarters issued a press release with the kind of cold precision that leaves no room for hope. The company would cease all locomotive production effective immediately. The statement spoke of changing market conditions and restructuring for the future, but the reality was plain. The locomotive division was dead. Over 1,500 workers received their notices. For many, it was more than a lost job. It was the end of a family tradition, a way of life that had defined Schenectady for generations. The closure rippled outward. Suppliers who had depended on Alco for decades faced empty order books. Local businesses braced for the loss of their largest customer. In the city's neighborhoods, the news traveled fast. Fathers and sons who had worked side by side, mothers who had relied on Alco paychecks to keep households afloat, all faced an uncertain future. No speeches could soften the blow. The gates that once welcomed thousands now stood locked. The company that had helped build a nation's railroads vanished almost overnight, leaving behind only the memory of steam, steel, and a dream that outlasted nearly every rival until it didn't. Once, Alco's locomotives thundered across a continent. Now, its empty factories haunt American industry, A ghost story written not by rivals, but by choices made in boardrooms. The question that lingers isn't whether Alco could have survived. It's how many giants today are laying their own tracks to oblivion, blinded by legacy and slow to change. Industry forgets, but history does not forgive. Share your thoughts below.